I spent $10,000 each month on my family's desires, but when I started to outshine my siblings, they tried to erase me from their lives only to beg for forgiveness afterward. So here's the story. I'm Nathan, and I'm 32 years old. Growing up, I was always the quiet one in a chaotic family. My parents would affectionately call me their little thinker, which sounds endearing until you realize that, in my family, quiet was often the same as forgotten. My siblings Lily, who's 35, Josh, who's 29, and Madison, who's 25, were always louder, more attention-seeking, and had big dreams, costly tastes, and constant needs. I was always in the background, watching them steal the spotlight. As a kid, I was never the one people expected anything great from. I was just there. Not to say that I was ignored or mistreated, but it was clear that my siblings demanded more attention. Lily, being the eldest, was the first in the family to really succeed. She became a financial planner and took every opportunity to let people know how well she was doing. Josh, with his charm, had this wild entrepreneurial spirit and a never-ending list of business ideas. Madison, the youngest, was an artist with big ideas but little follow-through. Meanwhile, I was just the nerdy brother who got good grades, went to college, and graduated quietly while my family cheered louder for everyone else. After college, I decided to take my own path. I took a few risks, invested wisely, and eventually built a tech-based business. It might sound boring, but it ended up being very profitable. I didn't tell my family much about it. I'd learned early on that it was easier to keep things to myself around them. I didn't see a point in boasting, especially since I was, well, the quiet one over time. As my business grew, I started making enough money to help them out a little. At first, it was small gestures covering Josh's car payment, paying a few months of rent for Madison. It felt good, like I was finally contributing in a way they couldn't ignore. As my business continued to thrive, so did the monthly support I provided. By the time I was 30, I was sending nearly $10,000 each month to help cover their expenses, debts, and other needs. I didn't need much for myself, and I thought that maybe, just maybe, this would make me feel valued, like I truly belonged in my family. But that was my first big mistake. It started subtly. During family dinners, I'd get quiet, almost pitying looks whenever I talked about work. Lily would find a way to add comments about how finance was the real moneymaker, dismissing tech as just a trend. Josh would shrug and mutter that he couldn't imagine doing something so steady. And Madison, sweet as she was, would just nod with a vague smile before switching the topic to her latest art project. I told myself it didn't matter. I was used to being the one overlooked. I thought, let them think what they want, I know my worth. But then, a few months ago, everything shifted. My business reached a major milestone, a big acquisition that practically secured my financial future. It was huge, a real game changer for me. My initial thought was that I'd finally done something they couldn't brush off. Maybe, for once, they'd actually be proud. So at the next family dinner, I brought it up casually. Hey, I've got some big news. We just closed a deal that's going to put us on the map in the tech world. Silence. My parents exchanged glances, and my siblings barely looked up from their phones. Lily was the first to break the silence, saying, "That's nice, Nathan, but you know finance is still the backbone of the economy. What's tech without someone to manage it?" I laughed it off, trying to ignore the sting. Then Josh chimed in, "Yeah, cool and all, but I just don't get how anyone could be proud of working in something with zero social value." Madison just nodded, mentioning she wasn't really into corporate stuff. I felt a flush of embarrassment. Here I was, genuinely proud of what I'd achieved, and they'd managed to belittle it with a few quick comments. I tried to brush it off, but the hurt stayed with me. After that night, the entitlement grew. It was as if my monthly support wasn't a gift anymore, but an obligation. A few days later, my parents even pulled me aside, gently suggesting that I consider setting up a proper monthly fund for family needs. My mom even went as far as saying, "Nathan, with all your success, it's important to take care of your family. Lily and Josh are under a lot of pressure, and Madison's art doesn't exactly pay the bills." That line hit me hard. Take care of your family. Wasn't that what I'd been doing all along? Since when did I become the family's personal bank for their dreams? The monthly help I'd started as a gesture of kindness now felt like a duty to support their lifestyles. The real blow came about 2 weeks later. I was out with friends, feeling genuinely good for once, when my phone buzzed with a text from Lily. "Can you cover Josh's credit card this month? He's struggling with his new business venture." When I replied that I was already giving enough, she sent back a message. "I still can't believe you wouldn't even have that money if it weren't for all the support we gave you growing up. Don't forget who helped make you." I sat there, stunned, replaying her words in my mind. Did they really think my success was because of them? That the years I'd spent working late, taking risks, and planning carefully were somehow owed to them? I started recalling all the times I'd asked for help growing up, only to be brushed aside because they were too busy with Lily's achievements, Josh's projects, or Madison's latest art phase. I ignored Lily's text, but the sting stayed with me. At the next family gathering, I tried to bring it up lightly, hoping for an honest conversation. I mentioned that I felt a bit taken for granted, and to my surprise, they all just laughed. Josh put a hand on my shoulder and said, "Don't worry, man, we know you're not like us, you're steady, practical. You'll always have our backs." I walked away from that gathering feeling hollow. I'd been giving so much of myself to a family that didn't see me, didn't respect me, and certainly didn't care about my own goals or accomplishments. I'd become nothing more than the family bank, the dependable one, the quiet kid who'd grown up to fund everyone else's lives. And the worst part was, they were starting to expect it. That night, I decided things had to change. No more being the overlooked sibling. No more letting them define my worth by how much I could give. But as I would soon discover, breaking free from a lifetime of family expectations wasn't going to be easy. After that realization, I began making small adjustments. I stopped immediately responding to every request my family sent my way. No more quick transfers for Josh's failing business, no last-minute payments for Lily's condo, and definitely no more covering Madison's rent for her art studio in some trendy neighborhood. It wasn't like I cut them off entirely, I just wanted to set some boundaries. But if I thought they'd accept this gracefully, I was very wrong. At family dinners, confusion was the first reaction. They'd drop hints about their financial struggles, clearly expecting me to step in as usual. When I didn't, I got puzzled looks, quiet sighs, and even guilt trips from my mom. She'd say, "Nathan, you know how tough things have been for your siblings, they don't have the stability you do." That stung a bit, but I held my ground. I wasn't going to be guilted back into funding their every whim. Soon, confusion turned to irritation. Josh openly asked if I'd forgotten the usual transfer, as if it were a missed bill payment. When I reminded him that I'd been helping them for years and maybe they could start managing on their own, his response shocked me. "Come on, Nathan, you're the one with steady income. We all thought you understood your role in the family, my role." Apparently, my job was to keep everyone's finances afloat. The more I held back, the more resentment bubbled up. A few weeks later, I overheard a conversation that hit hard. At a family barbecue, I went inside to grab a drink and heard Lily talking to Josh in the kitchen. They were laughing, and then the conversation turned to me. Josh was saying something about how I'd be nowhere without the family's support, and Lily, in her self-satisfied way, added, "It's funny how he thinks he's the successful one. We're the reason he even got here. Without us, he'd still be working some job." It felt like a punch to the gut. Here I was, working hard, helping them financially, and they thought I owed it all to them as if my achievements were nothing without them. I tried to ignore it, but every time I saw them after that, a wall of resentment built up. I couldn't pretend anymore. I started pulling back even further, not only financially but also emotionally. If they saw me as nothing more than the family wallet, maybe it was time I stepped out of that role. But that's when things got nastier. One afternoon, I got a call from a friend who sounded uneasy. "Hey man, I wasn't sure if I should bring this up, but there's a rumor going around about your business." Apparently, someone had been talking, hinting that my company was involved in shady practices, cutting corners, maybe even engaging in illegal activities. My friend didn't believe it but wanted me to know. The only people who knew enough about me to start something like that were my own family. I confronted Josh first. I don't know why, maybe I thought he'd be the least likely to lie to my face. At another family event, I pulled him aside and asked straight up if he'd been talking about my business. He laughed and said, "Come on, Nathan, people talk. Don't take it so seriously." He tried to play it off as harmless gossip, but his casual dismissal made my blood boil. I wanted to yell, to demand why he'd sink so low, but I held my temper, mumbled something vague, and walked away, leaving him with that smug grin. But it didn't end there. A few days later, Lily called with one of her concerned sister talks. She told me people were starting to question my business and suggested I should reconsider my priorities. She even said, "It's not a good look for the family," as though my independent success somehow tarnished them because they couldn't control it. I couldn't believe it. Here I was, supporting them monthly without question, and they were trying to destroy the one thing I'd built on my own. I wanted to scream, to tell her exactly what I thought, but all I managed was, "Thanks for the advice," Lily, before hanging up and letting the bitterness rise within me. I'd always known my family was complicated, maybe even selfish at times, but I never thought they'd try to sabotage me, especially after everything I'd done for them. It was like they couldn't handle me being more successful, as if I was supposed to stay in my place as the quiet one, funding their lives without stepping out of line or outshining them. The rumor only grew worse. I started getting strange questions from clients, people asking about things they'd heard I had to work hard to repair the damage, reminding everyone of my company's excellent reputation and high standards. Thankfully, my clients knew me well enough to trust me, but it was exhausting and humiliating to be defending myself from attacks from my own family. After that, I knew I had to take a stand. I decided to end the financial support, not just cut it down, but stop it entirely. They didn't appreciate it anyway, and I was done being their endless source of cash. I told myself that this would finally make them see I was serious, that they couldn't manipulate me anymore. But of course, that's not what happened. The very next day, I was hit with a flood of messages from Lily, Josh, my parents, everyone was calling and texting, demanding to know why the money hadn't come through. I let their messages sit for hours before finally responding with a brief message saying I was done, and if they needed help, they'd have to figure it out on their own. The backlash was immediate. Lily called me selfish and ungrateful, accusing me of abandoning them when they needed me most. Josh launched into a rant, saying he'd counted on that money for a major investment and that I'd let him down. My mother called in tears, asking why I was being so cold-hearted, and my father, who rarely got involved, left a voicemail implying that he felt I was betraying the family by refusing to support them. For the first time, I realized they didn't see me as a person, they saw me as an unending source of money, and even worse, they actually believed they deserved it. After days of accusations, I stopped replying altogether. I needed space to clear my head and decide what to do next, but my family wasn't about to let go so easily. Little did I know, they had one more surprise waiting that would push me beyond my limits. The seeds of betrayal had been planted deeply, and I sensed this was far from over. The worst was still to come. The first few days after cutting off the money were silent, eerily so. I thought maybe they'd come to terms with it, maybe even realize that I was serious this time. But of course I should have known better. The silence was just the calm before the storm. On the fourth day, I received a text from my mom that read, "Nathan, we need to talk. Family meeting this Sunday." There was no greeting, no question, just a direct order, as though I were being summoned. I considered ignoring it, but part of me, the part that still wanted to believe in my family, decided to go. Maybe I thought they'd finally understand, or maybe I just wanted closure. Either way, that Sunday, I found myself walking into my parents' living room, where everyone was already waiting. The moment I sat down, it began. Josh launched into a tirade about losing a major investment opportunity because he'd been counting on my support. Lily chimed in, listing all the expenses she'd run up, expecting my usual help. Madison sat quietly, but her expression was hurt, as if I'd personally betrayed her. My parents just watched the whole scene unfold without a word of support for me. I tried to stay calm and explained that my support had always been a gift, not an obligation. I said I'd help because I wanted to, but I'd come to realize I couldn't keep doing it at the cost of my own well-being. My voice was steady, but inside I was fuming, waiting for even one of them to acknowledge what I was saying. Finally, my dad spoke, his tone low and disappointed. "Nathan, family takes care of each other. I don't understand why you're being so selfish now. You've always been the one we could rely on." That word selfish felt like a blow. Here I was, having supported them for years, and the first time I set a boundary, they were calling me selfish. I'd always thought family was about mutual care, but apparently that only applied when it benefited them. Something inside me snapped. I stood up, meeting each of their eyes, a rare move for me in these family confrontations, where I'd usually sit and take it. But this time I'd had enough. "No, I'm not selfish," I said firmly. "You all are. Every single one of you. I've been giving and giving for years, but not one of you ever stopped to think about what I might need. I'm not a bank, and I'm done pretending to be one. I didn't know what reaction I expected, shock maybe, or even a moment of reflection." Instead, Lily scoffed, rolling her eyes. "Oh, come on, Nathan. You're acting like some saint. You wouldn't even be successful if it weren't for us. Mom and Dad practically raised you to be this successful, and now you're just going to walk away." Josh nodded in agreement, adding, "Yeah, man, we all made sacrifices for each other, but now we know where you stand. Just because you have a little money, you think you're better than us." Then my mom joined in, saying, "We didn't raise you to be so ungrateful, Nathan." I couldn't even find words to respond. I just stared at them, feeling like I was seeing my family for the first time. All these years I'd thought I was helping, supporting them out of love, and now they were twisting it around as if I owed them my success, my money, everything. Without another word, I turned and walked out. My mother's tearful pleas followed me down the hallway, but I didn't stop. I didn't look back. I just got in my car and drove away, not knowing where I was going, only that I needed to get as far from them as possible. In the days that followed, I tried to pull myself back together. It felt as though my world had been turned upside down. The people I thought were closest to me had become strangers cold, demanding strangers who felt entitled to everything I'd worked for. The betrayal cut deeper than I could put into words, and for the first time in my life I felt truly alone. Then, in an unexpected twist, someone reached out who I hadn't seen coming. It was Olivia, an old family friend who'd once dated Josh. We hadn't been close, but we'd always gotten along. She sent me a message, saying she'd heard about the family fallout and wanted to talk. I was hesitant, wary of anyone connected to my family, but curiosity won out, and I agreed to meet her for coffee. When we met, I was surprised by the genuine concern in her eyes. She began by apologizing for bringing it up, but said she'd felt compelled to reach out after hearing what had happened. As we started talking, I realized she understood my family dynamics better than I'd expected. "I don't know how to say this," she said, stirring her coffee. "But your family has a way of manipulating people. Josh especially. I know it might not be my place, but I think they've been taking advantage of you for years, and maybe you didn't see it because, well, they're family." Her words struck a chord. I'd always suspected they were using me, but hearing someone else say it made it feel real. We talked for hours, and she shared stories from her own experience how Josh had financially taken advantage of her, always making promises he never kept. She'd seen firsthand how my family's pattern of entitlement had affected her life, and now she was watching them do the same to me. With Olivia's encouragement, I started going through my finances, tracking just how much I'd given to my family over the years. The total was staggering, tens of thousands of dollars poured into their lives, their whims, their projects. It was a painful realization, but I needed to see it to understand just how much of myself I'd given away without expecting anything in return. Olivia didn't just empathize with my situation, she helped me develop a plan to establish both financial and emotional boundaries so that I could safeguard myself moving forward. I thought that cutting them off was enough, but she made me see it was only the first step. To truly move on, I'd need to close off every path that led back to them. Then, in another unexpected twist, Olivia introduced me to a lawyer friend of hers, James. Specializing in family law and financial disputes, he offered to help protect my assets in case my family attempted anything drastic. I wasn't exactly sure what drastic might entail, but I knew enough by now not to assume they'd back down without resistance. James reviewed some documents, and to my shock, he uncovered something disturbing. Josh had tried to take out a loan in my name a few months prior. The bank flagged it for verification, so it didn't go through, but the very fact that he'd attempted it left me speechless. That was when I realized that my family had crossed a line I couldn't overlook. They weren't just testing limits, they were actively trying to take from me, whether or not I agreed. Armed with this new insight, I felt an odd sense of calm. It was as if a fog had lifted, and I could finally see my family for who they truly were. It wouldn't be easy, but with Olivia and James by my side, I felt stronger than I had in years. I was finally ready to confront them, not just with words, but with undeniable proof of all they'd done. This betrayal went deeper than I'd ever imagined, but I wasn't going to let it destroy me anymore. As I prepared for a final showdown with my family, I knew this was no longer just about money or setting boundaries. This was about reclaiming my identity, my life, and my worth after years of being seen as nothing more than their golden goose. The more I thought about it, the more determined I became to face them with all the evidence I'd gathered. I was done letting them manipulate me, but this time I wasn't going in alone. Both Olivia and James insisted on supporting me, giving me a confidence I hadn't felt in a very long time. I was no longer just a pawn in their game, I was about to take control. On the day of the confrontation, Olivia suggested meeting at her place, a neutral setting where they might actually listen rather than fall into their usual tactics. I informed my family that I wanted to discuss some unresolved matters. My message was intentionally vague, and they all showed up, likely thinking I'd changed my mind and was about to apologize for cutting them off. They arrived with their typical airs, though their expressions shifted noticeably when they saw Olivia and James seated beside me. My parents seemed uncomfortable, Lily looked suspicious, and Josh wore his trademark smirk, the one he put on when he thought he held all the cards. I had to work to keep my composure as they settled in, acting as though they were indulging me by showing up. I started with the basics, telling them that I was aware of the rumors they'd been spreading and the impact it had had on my business. My mother blinked, seemingly surprised I'd figured it out, while Josh just shrugged it off, saying, "Oh, come on, Nathan. People talk. We can't control what they say." I shook my head, my anger bubbling to the surface. "No, Josh, you started those rumors. Don't pretend you're innocent here. I'm not blind to what's been happening for the first time." His smirk faltered, though he quickly recovered. I laid out all the evidence I'd gathered over the years, the monthly payments I'd sent to cover their debts, the loans I'd paid off, and the extravagant purchases they'd made with my money. I even showed screenshots of texts, where they joked about having their own golden goose. Lily's face flushed as she glanced at the screen, and my parents shifted uneasily, exchanging worried glances. But Josh just crossed his arms and watched me with narrowed eyes. Then I turned the floor over to James, who presented the bank documents showing Josh's attempted loan application in my name. The color drained from Josh's face, and he stammered, trying to deny it, but James wasn't done. He also had records showing that Josh had used my social security number on multiple applications, which could have severely damaged my credit had they been approved. "Attempted fraud," James said, looking directly at Josh. "If this had gone through, it would be grounds for legal action." Josh's voice wavered as he tried to maintain his composure. "Come on, Nathan, we're family. I didn't think it was a big deal. I needed the money, and you've got more than enough." There it was, the entitlement laid bare. He thought he was entitled to take from me without permission or even informing me, simply because we were family. As I absorbed his words, a mixture of anger and sadness swept over me. After everything I'd done for them, after years of giving, they still believed I owed them everything. My mother, realizing the gravity of the situation, started pleading, "Nathan, honey, please don't do this. We're your family. We love you. This is just a misunderstanding." I could tell she was panicking at the prospect of losing the lifestyle my money had afforded them, but it was too late. I couldn't ignore who they truly were anymore. Olivia stepped in then, her voice steady and calm. "Mrs. Davenport, this isn't about family. It's about respect. Nathan has supported all of you for years, and you didn't just take advantage, you exploited him. That's not love." Lily turned on Olivia, her tone dripping with contempt. "Oh, look who's talking, the ex-girlfriend who just couldn't move on. Do you really think you have any place in this family?" But Olivia didn't waver. "Actually, Lily, I'm here because I care about Nathan and don't want to see him hurt anymore. I don't need your approval for that." The tension in the room was palpable, and for the first time I sensed my family felt vulnerable, as though they realized I wasn't about to cave in like I usually did. I stood, looking each of them in the eye, the people who were supposed to be my family, but who had betrayed me in ways I'd never imagined. "I'm done," I said firmly. "I'm not just cutting you off financially, I'm cutting you out of my life until you understand what respect means. You took advantage of me, tried to ruin my reputation, and still acted like I was in the wrong. It ends here." At that point, my father, who had been silent until then, tried a different approach. His tone softened. "Nathan, don't make any rash decisions. We're family, and family sticks together through rough times," my father said, trying to persuade me. But I was done with the emotional games. I refused to be swayed by their manipulation again. "If family mattered so much, none of you would have done this to me in the first place," I replied, my voice trembling with the weight of my emotions. After a few tense moments of silence, they realized I was resolute. My mother began to cry, Lily looked furious, and Josh muttered angrily under his breath, avoiding eye contact. They each left one by one, throwing accusations my way, calling me selfish, heartless, and ungrateful. But for the first time, their words didn't hurt. I felt liberated, like I could finally breathe after years of feeling trapped. Once they were gone, I sat with Olivia and James, feeling an odd mix of relief and sadness. I'd always held on to hope that my family might change, that one day they'd see me as more than just a resource to be used. But they hadn't, and I was finally ready to move forward without them. In the weeks that followed, I started to rebuild my life, this time with firm boundaries in place. I set up protections to ensure none of my family could ever touch my assets again. Olivia remained by my side, reminding me whenever doubts or guilt surfaced that I deserved respect and that I'd made the right choice. Surprisingly, I got a call from Madison, the only one who had stayed silent during the confrontation. She apologized for not speaking up and confessed that she had been too scared of losing my support. Though I wasn't sure I could fully trust her, I appreciated her honesty. We talked openly, and she admitted that she felt stuck, unable to pursue her dreams without my help, but also afraid to challenge the family dynamic. She promised to give me the space I needed, and I told her that if she genuinely wanted to make changes, I'd be open to a future relationship, but for now, I needed time. Olivia and I grew closer, and I realized that she understood me in ways my family never had. She'd seen the manipulative tactics firsthand, experienced their entitlement and judgment, yet she still chose to stand by me. Our friendship naturally deepened into something more, a connection I never expected to find amidst all this turmoil. Then, unexpectedly, an anonymous blog post began circulating online. It discussed family betrayal and the hidden toxicity of those who demand unearned loyalty. Although it didn't mention my name, it was clearly my story. I suspected Olivia might have written it, but she insisted she hadn't. Regardless of the author, the post sparked a massive response. Thousands of people shared their own stories of family manipulation and thanked the writer for speaking out. Reading those comments was strangely healing, knowing I wasn't alone in this struggle. For the first time, I could envision a future without the weight of my family's unrealistic expectations dragging me down. I had Olivia, a newfound respect for myself, and a clear sense of what I wanted in life. The family I'd spent my life supporting had nearly destroyed me, but I'd survived, and now I was ready to thrive outside of their influence. The following weeks felt like the beginning of a new chapter, though I'd be lying if I said the transition was easy. The absence of my family left a void I hadn't expected. Despite the pain they'd caused, they had been my reality for so long. Fortunately, Olivia and James were with me every step of the way, grounding me whenever I started doubting myself. One morning, a letter arrived at my office, no return address, no name. Inside was a handwritten note from my father, his tone cautious and almost formal. He wrote that he disagreed with how things had ended, suggesting that families should put aside differences. He hoped I'd reconsider. There was no apology, no acknowledgement of the hurt they'd caused, just a vague appeal to reconnect. It was the same tactic they'd always used, no real accountability, just an attempt to lure me back into the role they'd assigned me as the dutiful provider. I put the letter away without responding. There were too many wounds left unhealed, too many unresolved issues. For the first time, I chose peace over compliance, and though it was both empowering and terrifying, I knew it was necessary. Reconnecting on their terms would only reopen old wounds. As time passed, distant relatives reached out. Apparently, my decision had sent waves through the extended family. People I hadn't spoken to in years contacted me, some expressing support, others simply curious, asking if it was true that I'd stepped away. It was as if I'd become a cautionary tale, the one who dared to say no despite the gossip swirling around. I felt more grounded and free than ever. Then, about 3 months after cutting ties with my family, something unexpected happened. A small local news outlet approached me, having seen the anonymous blog post about family betrayal, and wanted to interview me. Initially, I hesitated. Part of me feared the consequences of going public. My family might retaliate, twist the story, or even challenge me legally. But with Olivia's encouragement, I considered it not as a way to get revenge, but as a chance to finally reclaim my voice. With her support, I agreed to an anonymous interview. I spoke honestly about my experiences, from feeling overlooked to dealing with my family's entitlement and manipulation. I avoided using names, but I didn't shy away from the emotional toll it had taken. The piece was published under the title, "When Family Crosses the Line, One Man's Journey to Self-Respect." The response was overwhelming. People from all walks of life reached out, sharing their own stories, and for the first time I felt truly understood. My story had transformed from a burden I'd carried alone to a source of strength for others. The article gained traction online, going semi-viral as readers shared it widely. Emails poured in from people in similar situations, thanking me for helping them see their own worth. Some former friends of my family even reached out privately, admitting they'd always suspected that the golden child narrative had been skewed. Then, one day I received an unexpected message from Madison. She apologized for standing by while things spiraled out of control, admitting she'd been too afraid to confront the family's expectations. After reading the interview, she said it had hit close to home. "I know I didn't defend you," she wrote, "and I'm sorry, you didn't deserve any of it." I'd spent a lot of time reflecting, realizing how much I'd allowed them to control my life. Madison reached out, asking if we could meet for coffee and talk things over. When we met, she was nervous, struggling to find the right words. She explained that seeing everything laid out in the interview had forced her to confront her own role in the family dynamic. While she hadn't directly manipulated me, she hadn't done anything to stop it either. Madison admitted she had always envied my independence but had been too afraid to chase her own. We talked for hours, and by the end I felt a tentative sense of closure. I wasn't ready to fully trust her, but I appreciated her honesty. A few weeks later, I heard that Josh's latest business venture had crashed dramatically. He had attempted to secure investors with inflated numbers and promises that didn't hold up, leaving him buried in debt. Without my financial support to bail him out, he was struggling. I thought I might feel satisfaction hearing about it, but instead I felt relief his problems were no longer mine to fix. I was free from the obligation to clean up his messes. Lily, on the other hand, had gone quiet since our confrontation. I learned that she had tried to paint herself as a victim to some family friends, but no one bought into her story. Losing her steady flow of easy money had left the lifestyle she'd built starting to fall apart. I wouldn't be surprised if she eventually reached out, but for now she kept her distance, which suited me perfectly. Through all of this, Olivia remained by my side, and our bond grew stronger. I realized she was the first person in a long time who truly saw me for who I was, not for what I could offer. We spent more time together, supporting each other, and what began as rekindled friendship blossomed into something deeper. We hadn't planned on it, but life has a way of surprising you. Olivia became my rock, and for the first time I was happier than ever without the weight of my family's expectations pulling me down. As I rebuilt my life, I found new friends and formed real connections with people who valued me for myself. I took up hobbies I'd neglected, traveled to places I'd always dreamed of visiting, and focused on growing my business in ways that reflected my values, not the pressures I'd carried for so long. One day, as I was going through old emails, I found a voicemail from my mother, left weeks after our confrontation. She sounded broken, desperate, pleading for a chance to make things right. I hovered over the play button for a moment, debating, but then, with a deep breath, I deleted it. I didn't need to hear her words to confirm that I'd made the right choice. I was finally free, finally choosing myself after years of putting everyone else first. Looking back, I see now that my family had always seen me as an asset, a resource to tap whenever they needed something. They didn't see me as a person with my own dreams, boundaries, or needs. And while it hurt to walk away, I knew it was the right choice. I had paid for their desires, supported their lifestyles, and in return they had tried to take away everything I'd worked to build. I still get occasional messages from extended family or old friends, asking if I'll ever reconcile with them. But to me, making amends isn't about forgetting what they did, it's about learning to stand tall and respecting the boundaries I fought so hard to set. I'm no longer that quiet, overlooked kid in the background. I'm the person who chose to walk away, to value myself, and to reclaim my life from those who tried to drain it dry. And for the first time, I feel like I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be. Little did I know this was only the beginning.